This Friday, the Southern Common Market, known as MERCOSUR, celebrates its 30th anniversary through a virtual forum. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro led a virtual meeting of the team promoting the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World this Friday, in which he advocated unity in the face of the unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States. After 6 years of war, a ceasefire to end the devastating conflict in Yemen still appears to be far off, due to a lack of trust among the parties involved and the continued external intervention of Saudi Arabia. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. This Friday, the Southern Common Market, known as MERCOSUR, celebrates its 30th anniversary through a virtual forum. Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay were the initial members of the bloc, followed by Venezuela and Bolivia, which continues in the admission process. Since March 26, 1991, MERCOSUR has offered an alternative for economic, political and commercial integration for several nations in South America, although its main purpose has been to promote a common space that generates investment opportunities for member states through the competitive integration of national economies into the international market. MERCOSUR also offers a vision of integration that attempts to go beyond the strictly economic margins to consider the cultural aspects of member countries and to work together to promote and disseminate the prolific cultural production that exists in the area. And speaking during the MERCOSUR summit, President of Argentina Alberto Fernandez offered an assessment of the achievements made by the bloc while acknowledging the remaining challenges.
In the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the creation of the Southern Common Market, the anniversary of the Treaty of Asunción represents an appropriate moment to undertake an honest assessment of MERCOSUR, to value the achievements made along the way, and also to acknowledge the remaining challenges that lie ahead. I am convinced that with MERCOSUR, our countries have created a true milestone for Latin America. We are a zone of peace without any cracks, that dialogues and cooperates in order to think, that builds together a path for development.
In his speech during the MERCOSUR summit, President of Bolivia Luis Arce reiterated the will of his country to form part of the multilateral bloc.
We value the will and work of each member of this important space for integration. The results that we have achieved in these 30 years have a direct impact on our commercial trade, the quality of life of our inhabitants and our migrants, driven by the profound and integrative vision of our peoples. Let me reiterate the will of Bolivia to become a full member of MERCOSUR. We believe that Bolivia's membership represents an opportunity to strengthen MERCOSUR, to contribute to the integration of the South American continent and assist the coming together of MERCOSUR and the Pacific Ocean.
And also speaking as part of the MERCOSUR forum, Uruguayan President Luis Lacalle called on the bloc's heads of state to promote measures to address the COVID-19 pandemic and respond to other needs.
Therefore, in conclusion, after 30 years, as a son of this present moment, of which the world is moving very fast, there is no time for great speeches, great missions. Almost all the presidents who spoke before me spoke of pragmatism. I want to join this concept free of ideologies, thinking about the freedom to develop of the peoples, taking care of the bloc, and having as a focus each one of our countries. We have to work for the prosperity of our nations. This is done with MERCOSUR, but also with the freedom that our country needs and deserves.
In Ecuador, the electoral campaign ahead of the presidential candidates' election on April 11th is moving forward. With less than 3 weeks to go until the second round vote, candidates Andrés Arauz, representing the Union for Hope coalition, and Guillermo Lasso of the Creating Opportunities parties are in the midst of their electoral campaigns. This Friday, Arauz visited several regions of the country, while Lasso held talks and events with young people and businesswomen in the province of Los Ríos. Most polls place Arauz as the favourite to win, leading voting intention with 43.15% against Lasso's 23.75%. Swiss prosecutors dropped a 3-year-long probe into alleged money laundering by Colombian diplomat Alex Saab. The investigation focused on Saab's alleged connection with 22 accounts at the Swiss financial services company UBS. Prosecutors concluded that the evidence was insufficient to bring formal charges against Saab and another individual. Saab was arrested in Cape Verde on June 12, 2020, as his plane stopped to refuel. Saab's lawyer said he made an earlier visit to Iran in April to aid negotiations with Iranian officials to send oil tankers loaded with gasoline to Venezuela, suffering from the US blockade. The Venezuelan Foreign Ministry condemned the arrest at the time, which it described as arbitrary and irregular, noting it added to the actions of aggression, blockade and siege by the United States against the country. The annual report of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Colombia was recently presented, which reveals the worsening humanitarian situation in the South American country. Our correspondent Hanan Toba brings us the details in the following report.
The International Committee of the Red Cross in Colombia presented its annual report on the humanitarian situation in 2020. The study details the social and political consequences of the humanitarian crisis, aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and states that there are at least 5 internal armed conflicts that caused the displacement and confinement of 28,000 people.
78% of these confinements occurred in the department of Chocó. The other departments most affected were Antioquia, Nariño and Cauca. 21,307 people were subjected to mass displacement. Plus, naturally, there is a phenomenon of gradual displacement that is much more difficult, and 45% of these mass displacements occurred in the department of Nariño. The other most affected departments were Chocó and Antioquia. In total, these displacements represent 85% of the total in these departments.
This report draws attention to the impact of the armed conflict and the devastation caused by the violence. An example are the civilian victims of explosive devices. In 2020, 389 victims were registered, 226 of which were civilians, among which 36 minors. A total of 61 were killed. These accidents occurred in 69 municipalities and 17 departments, representing the highest figures since 2017.
The ICRC considers anti-personnel mines, explosive remnants of war, weapons launch and weapons of controlled detonation as explosive devices. So, we did not gather data only on cases of anti-personnel mines. The worrying thing is that of the 69 municipalities, 41 had not seen such cases in 2019. And so, we link this to the conflict dynamics that exist in various parts of the territory. We particularly mention those between different armed groups.
The context of a conflict that seems to vary little in 2021 and is intensifying with the passing of the time, social movements and human rights organizations point out that in departments such as Cauca, violence and attacks by various armed groups against communities have increased, allegations consistent with the Red Cross report.
This is a pluriethnic department, that is to say that there are large numbers of indigenous groups and communities, as well as Afro-Colombian and farming communities. They voiced their rights to water in defense of the territory, rejecting the arrival of large mining companies or monoculture. These historical struggles bother these groups that want to control the territory.
The report documents that in 2020, on average, every 3 days a new case of disappearance related to the conflict and armed violence was presented. In addition, 325 attacks were recorded against health personnel, facilities and medical vehicles, the highest figure reported in the last 24 years.
Hernán Darío Tobar, teleSUR, Bogotá, Colombia.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro led a virtual meeting of the team promoting the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World this Friday, in which he advocated unity in the face of the unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States. During the virtual meeting, President Maduro noted that June 24th will mark celebrations of the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Carabobo, considered a major victory of the Venezuelan independence struggle. Within this framework, international activities will be held to mark the important date. President Maduro also stressed that the purpose of this Friday's meeting was to prepare and bring together the ideas and proposals of some 1,200 leaders from 164 countries to confront the threats posed by world powers that impose criminal sanctions against the peoples of the world.
For the unity of the peoples, to hold a great meeting for the solidarity of the peoples, and so that all the platforms of struggle that we have in the world have a special encounter in tribute to Carabobo, in tribute to Simón Bolívar, and to take up with great force the flags of independence and self-determination of our peoples, of freedom, equality, truth, and the struggle for a new society. To all the leaders
Director General of the World Health Organization has urged countries to immediately donate 10 million vaccine doses to the COVAX initiative in order to ensure equitable access to vaccines globally.
Needs 10 million doses immediately as an urgent stopgap measure so these 20 countries can start vaccinating their health workers and older people within the next 2 weeks. So today I'm asking countries with doses of vaccines that have WHO emergency use listing to donate as many doses as they can to help us meet that target.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced on Friday that authorities will classify France as a high-risk zone for COVID-19, a move that sees Berlin tighten border controls and require a negative COVID-19 test and mandatory 10-day quarantine to the country.
Back from Djibouti, I did a PCR test there, which was negative, and with the result I could then enter Paris and from there to Germany. I didn't even know that it was a high-risk area. I was lucky. I think it is okay. It is so easy to do tests now that we shouldn't take any risks.
10 people were killed in a deadly fire which raged through a mall housing a COVID-19 hospital in the Indian city of Mumbai on Friday, as questions were raised about the facility's safety.
In the night at around 11:30 there was a smoke was coming out. We are staying nearby only in the same complex. So we just came out what has happened and then we came to know there is a fire in the hospital. This hospital has just started maybe 6-7 months back, and which was earlier, it was constructed maybe 3 years back, but there was no permission given, and suddenly because of COVID they said we have got a permission and they have started the COVID.
A study conducted by the Kenyan Peasant League reveals that 60% of small farmers, pastoralists and consumers are self-employed, and 32% have suffered an overall loss of income during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have more details in the following report by our correspondent Oscar Perdi.
141 of the 234 interviewees, that is, 60%, do not have formal employment and 11% are considered unemployed. Of these, 46% depend on their relative, and the rest on casual jobs. 7% receive charity support. Of the 67 interviewees who say they were unemployed, 51% claim that COVID-19 interrupted support services. 32% suffer a total loss of income due to the layoff, closure of businesses, or the reduction of casual jobs due to, for example, the closure of local markets.
People stay at home, depending on their own products. However, market foods, for example, tomatoes, were said to have coronavirus. There was no food and it was a big problem. You gave a little millet to the children in the morning, but then they would go all day without eating. And I had no money. There's a lot of poverty.
The tomatoes, the vegetables, don't last long. It is something that when you harvest, you have to sell it or it goes bad.
54% of those interviewed were affected by the lack of markets.
Many businesses suffered losses because they were dedicated to giving and taking so that the goods would not spoil. With school closed, many girls got pregnant because of the coronavirus. I still depended on the motor taxi, but it was difficult to make a profit. I was going to pick up kids. The police kept bothering me. You went to a place and they threw you out. In the end, you have to go home with the bike. The situation continues to be very difficult. We used to get about 500 shillings a day, but now only 100 or 200. If there are restrictions again, we need to prepare and organize to be close to the government and make sure citizens are able to respond to the challenge of finding food for their children. Thank you.
Most sought alternative income-generating activities, according to the study. People were more engaged in securing livelihoods than following government directive against the pandemic.
Who received any assistance here?
40% of respondents say that their response to the situation is not sustainable. 80% have not received any assistance during the pandemic, and 50% of the 20% who receive assistance receive it from local solidarity initiative. Only 15% of them receive government support.
This aid reached the bosses, and the bosses prioritize their people. They came out from up there, but they didn't arrive down here.
77% of those who receive aid know the problems of transparency in its distribution.
Aid was not forthcoming. That's why we need to unite. If we had help to keep track of the aid that goes out to make sure it gets to where it's intended, it would be major help.
We have theft due to corruption, because When we select them in elections, we do not elect normal people like this guy. He gets around by bicycle, plows the air with cows, and saws with his hand. He knows your problems, yet you forget him and give your vote to a great lord who builds mansions.
The farmers of Korea resent the oblivion to which they are subjected by institutions and discuss how they can empower themselves to ensure access to human rights. There are not enough teachers in Kurutugyange schools, and there are not enough health workers in the community health center, where there is also a lack of medicines.
They prescribe you some medicine and they say you should go buy it.
There are those who do not have money to go to the hospital. If you do not have the NHIF card, you need to look for money, and there is no place to find money. Then if you go to the hospital, you find that there are a lot of sick people, overwhelmed people. There's only one doctor. There's no separation. They are all stuck together, and it's a way of spreading the infection.
But as an NGO, can you help us in some way to bring medicine here?
We are not an NGO. We are a movement. KPL is a movement. It's a mass movement of peasants.
Show us the path and the way to get ahead. Now the door is open.
The conclusions of the study, once the data validation has been completed in meetings, will be presented to the government.
A ceasefire to end the devastating war in Yemen still appears to be far off due to a lack of trust among the parties involved and the continued external intervention of Saudi Arabia. Thousands of people marched through Yemen's capital Sana'a this Friday to mark the 6th anniversary of the Saudi-led military intervention against the Houthi movement, as the United Nations renewed its calls for a ceasefire. The resulting conflict has created the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. Saudi Arabia has been unable to crush the Houthis, who've been steadily gaining ground since the conflict started. In recognition of its defeat, the Saudi government recently presented a plan to end the war, including a nationwide ceasefire. The Houthis initially rejected the initiative, saying it offered nothing new. But their chief negotiator said that he was ready to hold further talks with the Saudi and US governments and the government of the regional mediator, Oman, to reach a peace deal. However, he stressed that fuel, food, medical and basic supplies are a humanitarian and legal right, and the movement would not accept any military or political conditions in order to receive them.
The recent political situation, what the US and Saudi Arabia have done recently, obstructs all efforts to pursue peace. These remarks they made to the air aimed merely to improve their images. We are always for peace and our hands are always out for peace. The solution to stop the war depends on solving the problems in the south. The Southern Traditional Council must be included in all future political negotiations so as to find a comprehensive political solution.
Authorities in the Ivory Coast announced on Friday that 38 trafficking victims from Burkina Faso would be deported to their country of origin in the next few days. The victims, including 18 minors and 20 young adults, were intercepted while being transported to work in a gold mine in Abousir in southeastern Ivory Coast. In February, authorities rescued 42 children who were trafficked to work at several mines and cocoa plantations in the West African country. Ivorian police also rescued 1,093 children as part of a major operation against human trafficking in 2020. According to charities working in the sector, more than 1 million children work illegally on cocoa plantations in the country, a figure that has been rising steadily over the last decade.
It is a relentless fight that Ivory Coast is leading to fight against child labor, both at the national and cross-border levels, and I would like this to be known.
The people we are talking about today, we received them in two waves. A first wave of 19 people since February 5, 2021, and a second wave of 19 people also on February 10, 2021. That is to say 5 days later. So in total, 38 people, including 18 minors and 20 adults.
On Friday, Turkish judges handed life sentences to 2 former police chiefs and 2 top ex-security officers over the 2007 killing of a Turkish-Armenian journalist. Supporters and human rights activists gathered outside the Istanbul court to stress that despite these life sentences, most senior police officers have gone unpunished and call for the investigation and trials to continue. 76 suspects were facing charges, including failing to uncover the plot to kill Hrant Dink, editor-in-chief of Agos, a Turkish-Armenian bilingual newspaper. Mr. Dink was a leading promoter of reconciliation between the Turkish and Armenian communities.
This decision will be overturned. This decision is wrong. This decision erroneously resulted in the acquittal of many people who were responsible for the murder and whose responsibility was proven with evidence. This decision is wrong and will be overturned. We want to underline once again that the dark veil that lies above this murder was not lifted, as we have said since the very first day, and as we have said multiple times. We will follow this trial until every single person who was involved in this murder stands before the court and gets the sentence they deserve.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.